first presentation, the first paper of Petar Bojanic. Actually, Peter, I know you. It was in Belgrade at the conference of Peter Eisenman. When you're on for, it was, I think it was in 2013. No, it was the second one. 13.
13.
Yes, yeah. It was a quite impressive conference on Peter Eisenman. And since then we met several times in Berlin and Rijeka and now here, and since then also you and Sanja became a good friend. And so we are all looking forward to your talk, the acts of projection. And I think we are very close to architecture and how can I say that? Yeah, our topic of architecture philosophy. Okay, please.
Thank you. Here in the title, in abstract, you see immediately many problems. First of all, I'm writing now not in French, not in English, always in Croatian or in Serbian, it's the same. And that my translator didn't want to translate, didn't want to lead this project alone. And he put projection, and this is bad. There is one more possibility, this is projects. Projects, it's better. Here in abstract we have problems with this epistemological status of project, then act, protocols associated with author, then problem of intention, production, relation between project and intention, which is not clear, then several synonyms, several problems that I said yesterday, problems in terminology, architectural terminology. I'm sure that in 50 years everything will be clear. That means we have a plan, program, plot, platform, concept, conception, and when you are using several languages, you have immediately many problems in translations. Then this something important for me, because I'm trying to finish the book about institution. Problem with this project in Western and European, is it project eminently Western or European procedure, and in that case specific use of time and space, which doesn't exist in different cultures maybe? Is it project architectural method? Because today we are all, for example, as a philosophers, for example, in projects. And then problems with examples, many examples. I put some names here, and one book, huge book published in Italy, Gordiano and Armando, Teoria del progetto architettonico, which is, I think, important to how to say, to move, to kick up new discussions. First, I've written a short text, argument about the project, but because this is a seminar, I added a few amendments, footnotes, and explanations in order to adapt this argument. If I say, for example, that I will shortly look back and explain this title and this abstract, or to talk on some places in this abstract, because this is initial sketches of this presentation, and sketches also first term we can say in this complicated protocol dominated by the word project. But if I say that I will shortly explain what it is that I'm doing, what is my intention, or what lies underneath, then such an act or such acts that refer to the existence of something somewhere else or somewhere behind would already be part of a protocol or register that refers to a project, but not design. Project, not design. I will try to differentiate those two words. Or perhaps even meta-project. Meta-project is, I think, first appeared in Massimo Scolari's 1973, in the book The New Architecture and the Avant-Garde. He uses this term when writing about Tafuri and Tendenza, and I quote Scolari, a kind of meta-project that extends to all the architecture that is taught, designed, and written. Questions such as what does he, she even want, or what is he or she talking about, seek a certain reflective reaction, except unless one wishes to ignore others' curiosity and appear foolish. Certainly, at issue is a turn, a word to which I will return a few times. It's turn, or reflection in action. Reflection in action, this is a syntagma, this is a phrase of Donald Schoen. Donald Schoen wrote the one book, the Reflective Practitioner, in a subtitle, How Professionals Think in Action, and he uses this phrase when describing the famous example, many times quoted in a literature example of one professor, his name is Quist, and his student Petra, who is making preliminary sketches in order to discover a basic design hypothesis. When I'm talking now, here you can see the maybe basic or design hypothesis. And this example between example Quist-Petra is demonstrated in detail in that book, for example, and in the process of reflection, you are trying to find, we can say, the basic design or this design hypothesis. Where is the problem? That Schoen's book was translated into Italian as Il progettista riflessivo, while, for example, Armando and Lubiano translate the title of their course in University of Torino, Progetto Umano in Italian, but in English is a human design. And you have immediately many other problems, Schoen's books, as well as the Nobel Prize winner Herbert Alexander Simon's book, The Science of the Artificial, the book from '69, The Sciences of the Artificial, have had the strongest influence on the understanding of projects in the second half of 20th century. Design is usually translated into European languages as a project, although not exclusively. For example, Simon's design is rendered in the French as a conception. Perhaps the most complete book on the epistemology of architecture, this is the book of Philippe Houdon, Essai d'épistémologie de l'architecture, 2003, in which he says that the conception is design is a crucial question of epistemology, which means that it must of necessity become a true architectural object. The architect, in translation in French, is concepteur, designer, for Simon and for Houdon. And Simon's definition of design is as follows. Design, not project, design is concerned with how things ought to be, with devising artifacts to attain goals. There are, however, authors who attempt to extend the notion of project, meaning conception or design. There is one author, a French guy, Robert Prof, who speaks on the projectual dimension of conception and of the project still beyond the design in temporal context. That means you have some efforts to differentiate those two words, projet, and design. When I'm attempting to reconstruct or present that what I'm doing emerges from something else, something only implicitly present in what I'm now doing. Well, this, for example, this is absent, but is not entirely here, but exists in some kind of traces when I'm talking about this. Then all I want is to prove that this is what that I'm doing now is projected act or planned, controlled action, because I already projected something. In other words, the project of one action, and now you as you remember yesterday when Carla spoke, this is phenomenological idea that project of one action precedes the action, which is nothing other than a portion of the content of the project whose realization is announced by the project. Content of the project and realization is announced by the project. This is legacy of phenomenology. Yesterday you saw resistant in Joerg, and I think you remember somebody who read Eisenman. This is always resistant to this heritage, and this heritage, I think, as Joerg said yesterday, I think this heritage is not useful for this, because this is some kind of... Okay, just for Germans, hier in erste Philosophie, Husserl, wir können auch sagen, die praktische Besinnung ist ein inneres Handeln und ergibt gelegentlich ein inneres Werkgebilde als den geistigen Plan. Geistigen Plan is the same as a project. That means geistige Plan. What is this?
Die geistige Plan.
Ja. Inneren Antwort für das, was im äußeren Handeln wirklich wandeln soll. You have some on the other side, you have something on your head, and then you have to realize that you have in your head. Then you have, this small passage from Simon Zeit, Heidegger, who made some kind of distance to Husserl, etc., etc. The existence of a project or projected act would constitute one of the first, and if certainly insufficient, basic guarantees that, for example, I'm not currently uttering nonsense. I'm not improvising, not bluffing. That means here I announced something in abstract that what is a guarantee that I'm not a cheater? Apart perhaps from, because, at the beginning you heard Joerg said, I know that guy, because he's not cheating. He sometimes, of course, he's cheating sometimes, but he said, I know his previous projects, large or small. And, well, you see this title and abstract on these talks, and there are potential guarantees of the ideal project, of something that I put here, and this is in German, Entwurf, and in Serbian, or creation, or Serbian creation, or creation Serbian, Navačaj. This is very simultaneously true. Entwurf and Navačaj follow in the steps of the Latin projectus, the past principle of proicere, to throw forward, extend, to throw forward. Jacere is to throw. In the German dictionary, for example, Pokorny ties the root ver with turn, through, and there is one old Slavonic word vresti, which is complicated now to show. Werfen means to throw, from the Latin jacere. to do something, but very fast. But very fast. This is the accent. Endpunkt is very important. Endpunkt is opposite to Objektum, to Gegenpunkt. You can find this in Fritz Mautner philosophical dictionary. That is to say, the title and abstract oblige me to follow that. I do, then, and that is now new problems. I have a project. Have. I do indeed have something to say, which I am attempting to do now carefully, because the title and abstract have been published in the program and as such documented. Program, also one word, very close to project, but program with different roots in Greek roots. This is public notice or plan of action to accomplish something public. That's why program, you know that program. Put simply, if I have, this is in italic, I have a project or a plan or a concept or idea or schema, conception, platform, etc. There are many words very close to each other. Then what I'm now doing is precisely the consistent act of that project or projected acts. Of the many potential acts, the act certainly belongs and emerges from or is part of my project. The answer to the question, where is that which I have, maybe is this, or which is mine, both of these words are italicized and are completely problematic, as well as what does the description of the project itself consist of, will be demonstrated precisely by the reflection I have connected with the word turn. I must turn to connect what I'm doing now with this. And that turn is I'm doing project with this turn, not before that. Having or lacking a project are Peter Eisenman's phrases. In one unpublished interview, but interview is constructed in the studio on the end of authority from 27 September last year, but you can find this many videos on the same subject. Over the course of 20 pages, Eisenman speaks of two avenues to power in architecture. One is through design. This is his word. Design. The other is through intellect. That is the thinking. That means you have on one side design, on the other side practice, but then he changed, no design. Practice and thinking will be transformed in project. You teach project, says Eisenman, by reading and thinking in the design studio. This is definition. You teach project, not design. You teach project by reading and thinking in the design studio during your design process. Not in the books, not in the history, but in a studio. Again, I quote, Eisenman, project and practice must be integrated in the studio. Then, I quote again, Gropius had a practice and not a project. This is not mine. I don't know how to explain this, but you know. Miss Corbusier, Wright, Loos, Koolhaas have a project, but not so Engels. Eisenman assumes that project can be defined, but that he himself cannot define his own project, rather that others should do so. And I quote again Eisenman, I don't need to define it because I do it. I was always, brilliant phrase, I was always inventing institutions and projects that I could appear in. Where's the problem? Problem is, what is the it? I don't need to define it because I do it. What is the it? That is to say, in order for what I'm doing to truly be in harmony with the project I have, it is necessary that I constantly constitute it through reflection, or reflection in action, or to constitute it through reflective reconstruction. There is no project before. You have just reflective reconstruction. These operations, and there are many, that create the project simultaneously confirm my acting in accordance with the project, that my acts are projected acts, ought to be called project acts. You have project acts when I'm turning back. This is because I am in that. With this, I'm trying to construct a project, and this is project acts. And what I'm doing now, that could be projected acts, because this paper, this behind me, implies my projected acts. That is, acts that create the project rather than actions that project implies. My acts are projected if and only if I project or create a project. That is, if I simultaneously produce project acts. If I'm turning around all the time. This distinction between project acts and projected acts actually leads us into entirely uncharted difficulties and characterize a potential theory of projects and projecting design, etc., etc. Okay, and this is actually modification of a distinction, one distinction made by Alfred Schütz, phenomenologist, but very obscure, obscure when you compare German original with English. In German you have Handeln als Tätigkeit, that means als act or action. Die Handlung als seines gedankliche Endpunkt, actum. In English this becomes rather obscure and dangerous generally. That means, I quote, action in progress and the already finished and constituted act. That means this is already finished and constituted act, that means actum, and on the other side, action in progress all the time, what I'm doing now, this is projected act. Well, his book is published in 32, translated in English 67, etc. Before explaining the basic principle of the functioning of this reflective gesture, because reflection is important, and my only question is how and by what act is a project made, I would like to insist on a few elementary facts. If we had the answer to this question, how and by what act is a project made, then we immediately recognize the problem of thematization. For example, you have many examples. For example, Sartre, in his very famous phrase from one lecture from 46, he said, "Man is indeed a project which possesses a subjective life." Stupid in English, in French much better, qui se vit subjectivement, who lives subjectively. Instead, I quote, "instead of being a kind of moss, of fungus, or cauliflower." Before that projection of the self, nothing exists, said Sartre. Before that projection of the self, nothing exists. Not even in the heaven of intelligence. Man will only attain existence when he is what he purposes to be. Then, for example, in 14th century, Bonaventura's hymn of authorship, when he describes 4 ways of making a book. He said there is four ways to making a book: scriptor, compilator, commentator, and author. And who is author? He who writes both what comes from himself and what comes from others. Our problem is this: what comes from himself. and this is author, to be called author. Or you see, for example, in front, Gary's, on the net, you have masterclass of Gary, and one phrase very good and very different a little bit. I quote Gary, I have always felt, if you know what you are going to do in advance, then you won't do it. If you know, that means there is some capacity to know. Maybe it's possible to know. If you know, okay, it will be different. But it's possible. There is some kind of epistemological status of this knowledge. When some time ago I initially proposed the title and abstract, how I proposed this talk, when I projected, pitching the suggestion, I did so with a reflective protocol. That means I turned and pitched something, which is why turn is a verb within the same order as projectus or their entity. Dubiano and Armando, using their own terminology, develop a detailed and always problematic dilemma whether a project precedes or follows the analysis. Prima l'analisi, poi il progetto. Or conversely, prima analisa and then, or prima, a project or pitch do not a priori precede my action, but are rather constituted by this action, thus simultaneously correcting and converting it. A thematization of reflective acts that make up a project or concept or theme or gestalt or position, never mind, many differentiate, many words problematic, would construct and fix a project as an acting document. This is different operation. How to fix the project, because I didn't fix nothing. I'm trying to explain what I have behind. But exists something at the end that architect has a project, and this is project as a document. He fixed, or he or she fixed something. When I put those words concept, theme, gestalt, or position, I think that a subject missing from departments of architecture is, of course, architectural terminology. That could be principal, I think, theoretical course for architects, and also the term concept is closest, it seems to me, to what Eisenman designates with the word project, because we can say that there is some kind of difference between concept and conception and design. Maybe concept is not necessarily fixed and manifested, because, as Eisenman said, not determined by time and should absolutely be differentiated from conceptual project. Or the name concept, the problem with the name concept when some architects, for example in Belgrade, there is one thesis now in progress, Vesnic, about the concept. When concept, the word concept in literature, Plautus, in Roman writer, very good explanation what is the concept. Conceive is to seek what is not and thus find it. Well, this is there is a concept, but concept is not always, never formulated and never became document. A project as a document produces obligations and controlled actions and becomes the condition of the existence of joint work in the studio or outside it. This is new step. When you have the project as a document, in that case you have a design project, and in that case you have obligations, controlled actions, and this is, well, that's the new step. This is the result of joint work in the studio or maybe outside. That is, the project as a document constructs disciplined work and is the condition of the existence of the institution. There can be no institution without the project. This is important for me, but important for you, because also for you architect, because this without institution, discipline and project, there is no architectural department, there is no studio, there is no teaching, there is no school. And that's project is something most important. Okay, here in this book you can see the connection between documentarity theory, documentalità, because design is necessarily documented, and in that sense it is possible to follow those authors. They are projects not yet documented. That my problem is, however, there are projects not yet documented because there is no there is something before design project, but those kind of projects who have only just become so. That means this is in process to be documented, and my attempt is to show that even as such they can be thematized. What is the service that Armando Lubiano gave us? That first of all, diminished significance in this book, diminished significance of the author for the project, because they said that there is no author but ambient, social and physical that precede to author. Project is a social object, project is a writing, and project is action, I quote, action issues from the document and not from the intention. Where's the problem? Problem is sometimes, for example, when they mention on one page, and very good, very important discussions and polemics for architects in Casabella in 1902, there is a controversy about the project, and one famous philosopher, Gianni Vattimo, he said, dwelling precedes building. They didn't explain this, but this is very, I think, important for all of you, for me also. Abitare viene prima di costruire. Dwelling precedes, what is this? Build, dwelling, what kind of, what this is theory, this is what? Which kind of protocol we can find for this concept of dwelling, this concept. Reconstruction of project, or so didactic performance, or didactic reconstruction, and amending the rules of work by introducing competing project produces myriad disciplines and thus ultimately institutionalize the possibility of disciplinary actions. Well, what next step is collectivity. That means to have design project you need a group. But this reflection in action, or this reflection, is always collective. Now it's collective. I'm doing something before you, and this is already reflection in action and the group, job of the group. This reflection of which I'm speaking is collective or social gesture. Analogously, Schoen's often criticized phrase reflection in action always and necessarily assumes a group or a plural agent, because studio is always group and plural agent. The situation in which an individual publicly explains his own action, for example me now, thus harmonizing it with the general position or advertised plan, Never mind, it matters little whether it is a murder before a jury, a child before his kindergarten teacher, a college professor before a student, and friend before another. This operation represents at once a common assessment of the plan or conception of a project, and potentially, in certain cases, this is an introduction into joint thematization, participation, acceptance of the plan on behalf of the group. That means a group, now this group is constituted in this way in the course of constructing and executing a project. A group executes a project together while also at once constituting itself as a group. That means the group in the same time is in process of constitution of the group, that means the studio, and in the same time they are constituting project which hold them together. It seems to me that the existence and then the validity of the project could be ensured only by a group, and that the group determines the potential development and ultimate fate, or say a sketch of an abstract or title. What does it mean? That means that if this project is good, if you are convinced, that could be, we can make group. If not, I will be on one side, you will be on the other side. That means that kind of operation, reflective operation, will produce project and group. Okay, in Kožev, Alexander Kožev, during the war, he wrote one book about authority. He gives a very simple example, even if his conclusion is entirely insignificant. That means the authority of the creator of the project, of the subject or author for him, is, I think, incidental compared to the authority of the project itself that forms the group and has simultaneously been its real creator. This is the quote from, very simple and very good quote from Kožev. Let us consider a familiar example. A band of kids got into play. One of these kids proposes to go and steal apples from the orchard next door. Immediately, by doing so, he casts himself in the role of the band's leader. I think that this is not important. Okay, he became this leader because he saw further than the others, because it was he alone who thought out a project, while the others did not manage to get beyond the level of immediate facts. He sees something more. But immediate group is constructed. In that sense, the act or those acts that make the project with which something is projected or thrown up, pitched or spun forth, represent, on the one hand, an attempt to impute current action into something new, a project or platform, thus ensuring their validity and duration. On the other hand, authors of these acts are necessarily diverse, and only their multiplicity will ensure the validity and duration of the project as such. The fact that the group exists implies two protocols contained in the word projectus. That means space and time. I think that there is no space and time without the group. That means with the other's body. I could not see, I don't know, for me there is no time. If when I see that somebody is dead, this is, I'm conscious that exists the time and space. Without the others, without the other body, there is no. And conversely, projectus holds this very same group together for joint action and motion in time and space. The group is the body of the project. Let us thus return to the scene of the founding of the institution, and this is the first effort of constructing an architectural bureau, architectural studio. Indeed, one of the first attempts at incorporatio in the histories of the West. A group of people who work and build together in Babylon is, without a doubt, the prototype of a group assembled much later by Filippo Brunelleschi, circa 1420 in Florence. In Florence, you see easy in literature the claim, for example, many times, Boutinet, that the architectural project was born with Brunelleschi, who divided and at the same time linked two periods that determined the creative act in the course of building an edifice. There is the period of time of work in studio or research-based on constructing a model or maquette, and the period of time on site in which the execution of the structure based on the model takes place. Boutinet does not emphasize, unfortunately, disciplined work of a group of people in the studio, because in the studio there is a group of people, not just Brunelleschi. Building the model of the cathedral, they are about to erect. The idea of collective intellectual work, a discussion about, I think that is the kickoff of philosophy, project in philosophy. That means the collective intellectual work, discussion, because this is Renaissance, discussion about preliminary hypotheses, the idea of critical reflection and inspection of coherence of argument and counter-argument is born in this place in Florence, and it will be forever ordained modern philosophy. There are that group in Babylon, there are any number of assumptions as to why the largest construction site in the history of mankind was destroyed. Nor can it be said that the project was unsuccessful and futile, given that the action lasted very long time, possibly even for centuries. Indeed, the unhappy end, because we know that Babylon construction was project, we can say, unhappy end of a project or its failure could always be one of the first and rather important characteristics of the project as such. Because project, one of the first characteristics of the project is to fail, is bad. Well, bad project, nothing. Two verses in Genesis at the beginning of chapter 11 speak on the construction site, the technological innovation, and a monstrous vision that certainly has an outline similar to what I have here designating with the word project. I quote, and they said one to another, look at this, they said one to another, it's collective imperatives, collective intentionality, conversation, etc. Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime had they for mortar. That means technology, for project, technology at the same time, innovation. That's why this is project also, innovation, because there is no project without this innovative start. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Okay, this is vision, project, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Name, we need a name. It seems to me that there are ever new and all too complicated reasons why this group was denied a construction license, because they had not construction license, and why the erection of this grandiose edifice did not last. Above all, the project could not be carefully thematized or constituted because it was not presented to the highest power before the work began. Highest instance. The group is rushing with the work and does not negotiate. It does not draw its own limits, give itself shape, does not adjust its aims. The group, which as we know does not have issues with communication and cooperation, there is no problem with this. They have, all members of the group speak the same language, the group is innovative, collective intentionality has been achieved, the group is without leader and in perfect equality, because that is all, there is no Brunelleschi in this first studio, but maybe is imitating, that was one problem of that group, Babylon group, they are imitating its creator, that means God, by those perform acting imperatives and utilizing various imperatives and that mobilize its members. They are doing same thing as a first creator. Although the group is manifesting a grand plan, that means idea, conception, vision, as opposed to the first creator who does not, because first creator, God, is above all a laborer, practitioner. He's not a thinker. The group, that group, Babylon group, still does not possess reflective strength that would enable the members of the group to remain in one place for any sustained period. That's the project, that's the studio, that's the institution. This is precisely the definition of institutional activity or studio, using the repertoire of acts, institutional acts or project acts, that can for as long as possible maintain one group in a single place. All these acts always concern reflection, that is the project. The name mentioned in this fragment, and let us make us a name, that means let us register our studio, we need a name to stay together, is really this very same great project, but also one of which the group is unable to hold its focus either permanently or for a long time. The question is why? Why we have the story of Babylon like this? One of the answers, without ever losing sight that all we are left with from the Tower of Babel is precisely the project, because we are all the time in our life's endeavor in one way or another trying to complete something, complete family, complete unity, complete the world, complete the production of grand institutions, for example, complete Europe. Europe as a project, it's a set of documents, and the constant reflection of those documents, constant assessment, and self-regulating. This project, Babylon project, is some kind of always on our mind as some kind of self-regulation. Why? One answer is that concerns of the violence of the project. Violence of the project, the violence would also immediately have to refer to reflection, that is violence of reflection. In every project you have violence. What does it mean? You see this. I try to explain etymology and try to explain Massimo Cacciari in 81. He said he's trying to oscillate, he's oscillating between the word force and violence in describing the main characteristic of a project, that the violenza suona nel progetto. Something is ringing, violence is ringing in the project. Lest we forget, among the more important characteristics, that in the project you have violence. I think that now is that Carla's effort yesterday evening could be maybe we can understand that there is something always problematic in project, in Nabacai, Prospectus, Projectus or Entwurf, is that it does not mean a weak pitch or weak sweep. Entwerfen does not mean I need your help or you Germans here. Entwerfen does not mean to drop something just in front or very closely behind oneself, because in German such a weak gesture might be designated with the word Vorwurf. Rather, it means throw very far afield. For example, reflection is an operation of emergence. Through reflection, I emerge beyond myself. The consequence of this move, easily confirmed with the word projectile, does not only consist of some kind of separation or production of a completely something without control, self-sufficient entity, for example, image, projection, idol, unreachable in its perfection. That means impossible to process reflexively, because they could not make some kind of reflection about this grandiose project of Tower. Why violence we have it in project? Because we have exclusion. Peter Eisenman points out this difficulty, which is always with Plato and the ideal order. Whenever he speaks about the project, or better, about the idea of the project, or the maximalism of the project. In the syllabus, seeing as an architect, that was the title of one of the more recent seminars, means that the architect, if he is truly an architect, although only few are architects and more commonly they are pretending to be so, means that by looking or pursuing the material and visible before him, sees the invisible project. That means architect is architect if behind the something visible he or she sees something invisible. I think, as you know, as you remember, on 15 probably occasions in various interviews, Eisenman cites versions of Colin Rowe's words from one of their joint trips across Italy, probably in the summer of '61. In front of a Palladian villa, Colin Rowe says to Eisenman, sit in front of that facade until you can tell me something that you can't see. In other words, I don't want to know about the rustification, about the proportion of the windows, about the ABA symmetries, or any of those things. I want you to tell me something that is implied in the facade. I want you to tell me something that is implied in the facade. The word project in Eisenman functions similarly to the word die Geste, eine Geste in Wittgenstein. You remember in Wittgenstein they wrote just 6 sentences about architecture as a Geste. Good architecture is a Geste, is a gesture. But this is some kind of filter. That means Wittgenstein is trying to his attention is to eschew or expel bad philosophers from philosophy, and in that case to expel bad architects from architecture. And this is in the project you have announced this exclusion, and we are dealing with an act overshooting and expanding to beyond the surface. That is the project, beyond the surface or edge, which then always implies exclusion, abolishment, banishment, exclusion. Proicto is expulsion, banishment. That's why some projects are good and many not, because you have exclusion, expulsion, elimination, and that are the moments about we must think in the context of the project, only in the most, of course, abstract sense, without dwelling on them, yet also aware that in order for a group to constitute itself temporary and work actively, which would mean work on a project, it of necessity excludes the insufficiently engaged, committed, insufficiently competent, dynamic, even insufficiently intelligent, and thus a social. That means project is always for strong, for strength reflection. It would probably be, okay, in that case you see in a project the essence of capitalism, you see the neoliberalism, you see profit, you see competition, etc., etc. It would probably be incorrect to say that reflection or reflection in action does not imply critique or systematic doubt as an integral portion of the project strategy of structuring and execution, because with project you have immediately the other projects and you are comparing all the time which is better and which is, but in the same time, however, hesitation, there is no place for hesitation in a project, in a studio, there is no place for delay, for alternative work on a counter project, and certainly needs to be accounted for and placed within potential new processes and aims, and to imagine de facto something different, a little bit different. Thank you.
Now, Peter, thank you very much for unfolding the act of project or projecting, maybe also decomposing it or deconstructing it. I'm not so sure about these three terms, but I was very intrigued by your comments on this passage on the Tower of Babel. It's very interesting in the connection to the name, so that the project has to develop a name in order to be project. There's a very nice famous building in Italy, in Torino, the Mole Antonelliana, which is a fantastic building. It's 169 meters high, and it failed really in the kind of greatest dimension, and it has no name. So it's still called today the Mole Antonelliana. It's the big building of Antonelli the architect. Very interesting. It's the Tower of Babel, as a matter of fact, this case. Yeah. Well, I would like to open the floor for discussion and questions and comments. I found it very interesting, the concept also. Maybe we have to also elaborate a little bit on the term Entwurf and Entwurf and Entwerfen in German.
Yeah.
Because it's very interesting. So Entwurf is something you throw something, but not exactly knowing what you throw and why you're throwing it. It unfolds. So it has to do with an unfolding of something which is already existing, but you do not know until you throw it. So there's also, while you throw it, there's not only a process of unfolding, probably it's also a process of transformation. Something, while you throw it, it transforms by unfolding itself. And this concept.
How do you explain this difference between the project and Entwurf in German? You started to talk with that
yes.
Would be good to...
Yeah. Maybe when we briefly talked before your lecture, I said, well, in German you also, if you write a letter, you make, you make an Entwurf. So you make not a project, but an Entwurf. So you make, you give the letter a structure, or if you make a talk,
sketch.
It's also a sketch. Yeah, maybe it's more than a sketch. Maybe it's just you give an order. You put you define roughly some topics, but the letter and the content eventually evolves out of your projecting act somehow. While writing, you arrive at a conclusion or at a kind of knowledge, so that something comes to the fore. So the emerging of something, of an idea, and this is probably something different from a project. So you're not saying I'm projecting a letter, but you're saying I'm entwerfen. No, projecting would be maybe the translation, but it's not a project. It's not a project.
Is it possible to say that design project is Projekt in German.
So ein Projekt, yeah, you talk about the project, but the Entwurf is probably...
When you are saying in German Projekt, this is
it's the
design
result,
project.
it's the result.
Result. Yeah. Fixed.
Yeah.
We're a bit behind time, so I have fundamental questions. I just throw them in and maybe one can reflect on them. I don't really would invite you to answer because it would take months, I suppose. But what I've thought about while listening to you and to your deconstruction is what kind of temporal knowledge one has to assume, because the idea of projects as you unfold it implies that there is a forward dimension. One can oppose projects to retrojection, as mentioned. Retrojection is to imagine a different past, or to try to change the past by retrojecting something. So you have to know something about the future. There has to be a future, and you have to know the direction of time in order to project. And you have to have some knowledge of the future as something that is not present, so that you can project. Otherwise, it would be an intention or a sketch, I don't know what. And the other question I would like to just throw in is that your title, Acts of Projection, makes me think of the speciality of the project. I think in German we would say Entwurf in architecture as a difference to sketch and intention, for instance, which dominates in philosophy. The discussion of intention in philosophy is always you have an intention and then you realize it. What's special about the project in architecture is that you can act on the project, act upon the project, which is you can test its future promise and then change the project. You don't have a sketch or a projection and then you realize it in architecture, but you can work on the model, you can work on the sketch. And
how you are changing the project? What you are doing when you are changing?
Yeah, but I just want to. Yeah. So it's a fascinating fact that the relation in architecture is not only you have a plan or a project and then you realize it, but you work on the project and you test it according to at least two dimensions, it seems to me. Realizability, which brings in your knowledge of the present, but also in which way it is promising to go beyond something that you know already. So there's a sort of a contradiction, temporal contradiction in your testing and working on the models, which is interesting. Well, sorry, this is fundamental to answer.
Decision will be decision of the group in the studio, or when you are changing something. I'm asking of you architects, when you are changing something in a project, you are doing what? This is always group decision or no?
I would be interested if you, when you're talking about the project, does it apply for you, like talking about architecture, is there an object in the project, or can it be also something like a social project, which doesn't necessarily mean you have like, you know, a figure which needs to be built up through plans and models and stuff, but like something invisible.
Idea of project invented in positivism, Auguste Comte, Bachelard, they are invented difference between subject, object and project. You know, the science, the idea of new science, it will be, you know, founded on the project, not on the subject or object. Object in now, idea is that project could be epistemological object for us, but this is not the object. This is for Maunder, that means 100 years ago, this is something contrary to object. There is no, it's completely contrary to object. On one side you have a project, the other side. And project is invented something between subject and object. Because in project you have the time, you have a space, you have everything. Well, it's very interesting how to think this triad. Because he mentioned this in Bachelard, you can find this, but this is just only one phrase. It's very difficult how to arrange this idea, this one.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned this picture of the Tower of Babel, and I remember that beautiful article of the Swiss historian Stanislaw von Moos. He's writing on these two versions of Bruegel. One is in Rotterdam and one is in Wien. The one is Rotterdam. In Rotterdam is like he describes as like the static one or the dead one, and the one in Wien is the lively one. And he points an issue which I think is important also in this question of time and the direction of time, because he compares these two situations of the tower with the directionlessness of comparing the construction site with a ruin, because they have the same qualities, and they meet at some point where they are both unfinished, backwards or forwards. One is being destroyed and the other is being built to the end. And he points at the fact that this directionlessness of the time is actually the one thing that makes the ruin and the construction site to the same, and that is a project. And it's very, I think it's a very, very lively and good illustrative reflection.
Maybe the difference between Entwurf and project is that Entwurf has an epistemological dimension. It produces knowledge, while the project itself produces effect. In the case of, for example, of the social project, it's just the matter is to be implemented.
Obligations.
While Entwurf, I think this is you are looking for the epistemological status. It produces knowledge. It's a knowledge-producing process, yes, which is realized in time. Yes, whatever project Entwurf there is, it is probably in time. And I think
project is administrative.
More or less, yes. Then you know what you do. Yeah.
Yes.
Then you have a set of plans, and you follow these plans and implement it.